Well, welcome everybody. My name is Rebecca Binstock, and I serve as the Executive Director of the North Dakota Ethics Commission. And I want to welcome all of you guys to our very first ever legislative learning session. Thank you. Yes, we are going to be doing a few more of these with different stakeholders through the next few weeks. But we picked lobbyists first. Not because you guys are a favorite, although you might be, but because you guys start your work earlier, right? So at this point, I'm really glad that everybody showed up and is in person today. One of the things the Ethics Commission has been talking a lot about and discussing is how we build more of a community. And one of the ways that research shows that you do that is you're physically in a room, physically sharing a space. So that is why we did this in person. And I think Logan and Alicia are probably sick of me talking about it and how important it is to have those in-person interactions. So thanks for being physically here today. As I said, my name is Rebecca Binstock. I serve as the Executive Director. Today with me is Logan Carpenter. He serves as our General Counsel for the Ethics Commission. And then also I want to point out our other individual in our office is our Operations Administrator, Alicia Meyer. You may have received, you want to put your hand up, be like, hey. So Alicia is also in our office. She serves as our Jane of all trades, let's call her. And if you guys ever have logistical questions or something, Alicia can certainly answer those. I know many of you submit open record requests or just information requests to Alicia on a regular basis. So certainly feel free. Logan and I both have our business cards in the back of the office, or in the back of the room, excuse me. And so if you guys do have, is there a buzzing sound? No? It could just be in my ear. Is it? Okay. I can't. Okay. Anyway, Logan and I's business cards are in the back of the room. You can pick those up as you go, and you can certainly, throughout session or at any time, reach out to us with questions. Yes, both of our cell phone numbers are on those cards as well. So with that, as I already said, over the next few months, we're going to be hosting several of these legislative learning sessions to educate lobbyists, North Dakota citizens, and state officials about ethics rules. Really, the whole goal of doing these is to prevent issues before they happen, to prevent you from walking into an issue, or for you to be able to identify when you have an issue and then be able to course correct, help you make the correct decision as you move forward. So we're going to thoroughly talk about a few specific ethics rules that apply mostly to lobbyists, or that lobbyists need to be the most aware of. That's pertinent to your advocacy work. And then we're also going to have time to answer questions that you may have. Also, at any time, if you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand to ask the question. If you don't feel comfortable asking the question in front of the group, you can certainly reach out to us afterward. For those of you who are attorneys, just on a logistical note, please be sure to sign in the back so that you can receive your CLE credits for attendance today. So with that, let's turn to our agenda for the day. I'm going to struggle with this. I tend to walk while I present. It doesn't work very well when you have a podium. So our agenda for today. So what we're going to talk about and what we're going to cover today, we're going to cover what we consider kind of the core tenets of what you need to know as you do your work, as you start legislative session, as you get into legislative session. And so one of the things, for those of you who are maybe new to this, is that all of the Ethics Commission's authority, rules, everything stems from Article 14 of the Constitution. So we're going to talk a little bit about Article 14, how it was created, how we got where we are, and how the rules have been made, okay? The next thing that we are going to focus on is lobbyist gifts, or the lack thereof. Lobbyist gifts is probably the way to do it, to talk about it. We're going to talk about the general prohibition against lobbyist gifting, and then we're going to talk about some exceptions, and then best practices. This also tends to be where we get the most questions, so if you do have questions, feel free to ask, because the chances are that somebody sitting beside you may have the same question. We tried to pick some of the ones that we've gotten repeatedly in the past to highlight, but there may be others out there that we're not aware of. We're only a few years into doing this, so there may be new ones. The other thing that we're going to talk about is this campaign contribution restriction. That is in Article 14 of the Constitution. We're going to briefly touch on that and some best practices that we have for that. And then the very last thing that we're going to talk about, which we tend to get very frequent questions on, is the 2-year lobbying moratorium for elected officials. So that has a lobbying component as well. So, and who that applies to, that's really the question that we end up getting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Carpenter, and we'll get started.
I feel like I'm going to be in the way, so please use the screens throughout the room if I am. But good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start our session today with a quick rundown on how the Ethics Commission was established. For a lot of you who have been attending our Dakota Dilemmas webinars, this will probably be a little bit of a deja vu session for you for this first part here. So just bear with us, and let's kick it off with the Ethics Commission back in 2018. So a citizen-initiated ballot measure was sponsored by North Dakotans for Public Integrity back in 2018 that put Measure 1 on the general election ballot that year. That measure established a state ethics commission in the North Dakota Constitution, and voters passed it by 54 to 46%. That created Article 14 of the Constitution, and that's where the commission gets its authority from. North Dakota then joined, at that time, 47 other states with an independent ethics commission or its equivalent. Only 2 states today don't have a government office dealing with ethics, and that's Idaho and Wyoming. So right after the creation of the Ethics Commission in 2018, the legislature in 2019, during the 66th legislative session, passed legislation for the commission that sets out procedures for the commission and certain penalties Article 14 of the Constitution required the legislature specifically to create. This included penalties for the topics we will cover today: lobbyist gifts, lobbying by elected public officials, and lobbyists delivering campaign contributions. Also in 2019, the commission had its first members appointed. The Constitution requires 5 members appointed by consensus agreement of the governor, the Senate Majority Leader, and the Senate Minority Leader. Commissioners cannot be lobbyists or other state public officials. Our current commissioners are Chair Dave Anderson of Bismarck, Vice Chair Ward Kozer of Williston, Ron Goodman of Oaks. He was the previous and first chair of the Ethics Commission, Dr. Cynthia Lindquist of Devil's Lake, and Murray Sagsveen of Bismarck, who is our newest commissioner who was appointed just a couple months ago. The mission of the North Dakota Ethics Commission is to strengthen the confidence of the citizens of North Dakota in their government by ensuring and promoting transparency and accountability. And the Ethics Commission has authority to adopt ethics rules related to transparency, corruption, elections, and lobbying. The Commission refers to those informally as its 4 buckets of authority, to which any lobbyist, public official, or candidate for public office shall be subject. The Commission also has the authority to investigate alleged violations of the Commission's rules, Article 14 of the state constitution, and related state laws. So let's talk about the Commission's constitutional authority a little more in detail. So when the Commission was considering its gift rules that Article 14 directed it to create, the Commission requested an opinion from the Attorney General when it was defining the term lobbyist. The Commission asked whether it could define the term lobbyist broader in its rules than the statutory definition of lobbyist in Section 5466.01 sub 8 of the Century Code. The purpose was to enact rules in order to give effect to the language of Article 14 when it discusses that gifting prohibition by lobbyists. In Letter Opinion 2020-L-09, the Attorney General opined that the Commission has constitutional authority to promulgate a rule defining lobbyists in proposed rules, and it can be more expansive than the statutory definition of lobbyists. The opinion noted statutory ethics provisions and Ethics Commission's rules should be read in harmony when possible, and that means when it's reasonable and workable for the circumstances. However, if they can't be harmonized, the constitutionally authorized rule by the Ethics Commission prevails over the statute. And the Attorney General's opinion was based upon a Supreme Court opinion of City of Fargo versus Ruther. That case didn't really have anything to do with ethics, but it defined the legal parameters that are applicable for the Ethics Commission by modeling it in the court's process. So the North Dakota Supreme Court, in that opinion, analyzed whether a statutory provision which limited the admissibility of this is always a mouthful, but I'm going to say it, the alcohol level evaluation roadside tester, whether the admissibility of that conflicted with rules of evidence adopted by the North Dakota Supreme Court. The North Dakota Supreme Court, like the Ethics Commission, has constitutional authorization to promulgate rules of procedure to be followed by all courts in the state. Ultimately, the Supreme Court concluded the legislatively enacted provisions could be harmonized with the constitutionally enacted rules, but if the statutory provision engulfed a constitutional rule or is in direct conflict, the constitutionally promulgated rule by the court system prevailed. Both the Attorney General's opinion and this supporting case law then provide the basis for how to analyze and potentially harmonize Ethics Commission's rules adopted in accordance with statutes that address the same thing. So now that we've addressed the Ethics Commission's rulemaking authority, let's turn to what the procedure looks like in the rulemaking process. So the Ethics Commission is not an administrative agency. It's an independent constitutional entity outside the three branches of government. So the Ethics Commission's rulemaking authority is constitutional and is derived again from Article 14 of the North Dakota Constitution. This is distinctly different from the source of authority for administrative agencies in the executive branch, which is delegated to agencies by the Legislative Assembly. Therefore, the rulemaking process for the Ethics Commission is modified from the rulemaking process for those administrative agencies. In Section 546611 of the Century Code, the Ethics Commission is required to follow the provisions of the Administrative Agencies Practice Act, which specifically apply to the Ethics Commission. So if you go through the Administrative Agencies Practice Act, you'll notice that portions of it, which specifically apply to the Ethics Commission, include language referencing the Ethics Commission. Typically, you'll see the terms agency and commission. Agency meaning agencies in the executive branch, commission meaning the Ethics Commission outside the executive branch. So the Ethics Commission is subject to some of the requirements within that act, but not all of them. So the ones it is subject to is the regulatory analysis requirement, the fiscal impact statement requirement, a takings assessment requirement, and a hearing, notice, comment, and publication requirement within that act. However, there are some notable portions that don't apply to the Ethics Commission. Unlike administrative agencies, commission rules are not reviewed by the Attorney General or the Legislative Administrative Rules Committee before final adoption. These provisions are inapplicable, again, because the Legislative Assembly does not delegate that rulemaking authority to the Commission in the way it delegates it to the executive branch, boards and commissions, and other agencies in the executive branch. So a brief overview, what does the process look like for the Commission to adopt rules? Again, it's modified from the administrative agency process. The Commission will prepare and finalize the proposed rule. It'll provide notice to the public through publication in the newspaper. There's a very uniform procedure that all boards and commissions do to do that. The Commission will receive comments. Then it'll go to a public hearing where people can come and comment orally on the proposed rules. The Commission then responds to comments and has final approval at a Commission meeting, a regularly scheduled meeting. then the rules are published in the North Dakota Administrative Rules in Chapter 115 if you are looking for them. So now that we've talked about the process, let's talk about the rules themselves. What rules has the Commission established? The Commission's established rules related to the complaint process, lobbyist gifts, the appearance of bias in quasi-judicial proceedings for public officials, conflicts of interest for those public officials, and is currently discussing financial and travel disclosure statement rules for public officials. So the complaint rules were the first rules. Those were adopted in 2020, right after the Ethics Commission was created. Those describe the process for filing and investigating a complaint with the Ethics Commission. The lobbyist gift rules were also adopted in 2020, shortly after the complaint rules, I believe. Those describe the prohibited gifts from lobbyists to public officials, as well as exceptions to the prohibition on gifts, and that's the focus of what we're here for today. The appearance of bias rules and the conflict of interest rules, those were adopted in 2020. The conflict of interest rules came a few months after the appearance of bias rules. Those are really for public officials on how to manage conflicts when they're working in state government and their day-to-day work. So let's jump back to the lobbyist gifts rules, and I'll hand it back over to Rebecca to start that off for you.
All right, thanks, Logan. So we just talked about the rulemaking authority and the rulemaking process. And so we're going to focus primarily on the rule that has to do with the lobbyist gift prohibition. So where we start with our lobbyist gift prohibition is Article 14 of the Constitution. So Article 14 instructs that a lobbyist may not knowingly, and I'm gonna look at this, knowingly give, offer, solicit, initiate, or facilitate. Give, offer, solicit, initiate, or facilitate a gift to a public official. But there's a reciprocal rule that's in the Constitution, meaning that a public official cannot knowingly accept, a gift from a lobbyist. So what the Constitution did is it created this as our baseline foundation rule, and that is the gift prohibition. So gifts are prohibited. Now, there was a few exceptions built right into the Constitution, and that prohibition doesn't apply when a lobbyist is an immediate family member of the public official. That is built in. We do have that comes up on occasion in state government, okay? So if we look at the definition or what is included as that baseline rule in the Constitution, we have to look at some of the definitions that are in there. So we're going to talk about the definition of a lobbyist, we're going to talk about the definition of a gift, and we're going to talk about the definition of a public official. So presumably, a gift is defined as any item, service, or thing of value that is given in exchange. Oh, sorry, I missed a word. I apologize. Gift means any item, service, or thing of value not given in exchange for fair market consideration, including gifts of travel or recreation. So basically anything that is given that has a value, a market value. That is going to be our definition of gift. We also then talk about, well, who in the world is a public official? This is probably one of the other questions that we get frequently, is who is a public official? Is that all state employees? Is it state employees and local officials? Who does that all apply to? And that is a limited scope of individuals. It is not all state employees. It is going to be individuals who are elected or appointed in the legislative or executive branch. And then it's going to be Ethics Commission members and legislative employees. So when we say elected and appointed in legislative or executive branch, that is going to mean our statewide office holders, our 14 statewide office holders, all legislators, but it also then is going to include individuals appointed to serve on boards and commissions. So that definition does include approximately about 2,500 individuals in the state. Keep in mind, did I say legislative employees? I did, right? Okay, just wanted to make sure. It does also include legislative employees. It includes individuals in the executive branch who are appointed. As I said, boards and commissions, those are all appointed in our state. It also may include certain executive branch employees who are appointed. There are a few that are appointed. So if you have a question, we can help you. Actually defining who is appointed or not appointed in the executive branch employees is not as straightforward as everybody would like it to be. For instance, I am appointed to serve in my role. Most deputy levels are also appointed. And then below there, sometimes they are appointed. Most of the time, they are not. But if you have a question about whether somebody is appointed or not, you can come to us and we'll be able to help you with that. It also may just be safe to assume that if they're deputy level and above, they're going to be appointed. So then we have what the Constitution does after it establishes kind of this baseline rule that a lobbyist may not knowingly give a gift and that a public official may not accept a gift. Then it allows for the Ethics Commission to create exceptions. So the language that it does is it actually says a gift is not, and then defines what it is not. It is not purely information or material, informational material. A gift is not a campaign contribution, and a gift is not, here's the definition that we're going to talk about a lot today, something that is a thing of value given under conditions that do not raise ethical concerns as determined by rules adopted by the Ethics Commission. Now, that specific section or that phrase is defined by what comes right before it, which says that the purpose of that is so that North Dakota residents can meet with public officials and in educational and social settings inside the state. So the commission has interpreted that to be that exceptions to this gift prohibition apply in state, not out of state. And we can talk a little bit more about that in the future. So Article 14 of the Constitution, it gave the Ethics Commission 2 years to adopt these rules. And so they went ahead and did that. And one of the things that they then did is they adopted all of these exceptions. There's not a lot, there's 8, and we'll walk through those. But before we get there, one of the things that we need to define, and this is another one of the areas that we get a question on, is who in the world is a lobbyist? So, for Ethics Commission rules, for rules adopted pursuant to the Ethics Commission's authority under the Constitution, the term lobbyist is used in a broader sense than when we talk about a lobbyist defined by the Century Code. So how we like to analyze this is you say, okay, am I a lobbyist? Do I need to register? And am I subject to Ethics Commission rules? So how we are going to talk about this is that we have exclusions. Under both the Century Code and the Constitution, certain classes of individuals are not lobbyists. They are not going to be considered lobbyists. And there are 5 different groups of individuals that are not considered lobbyists under Ethics Commission rules or under the under the Century Code. Those are going to be legislators. It's then going to be private citizens who appear on their own behalf. We then have government employees who are acting in their official capacity, whether that's a county level employee, whether it works somebody who works for a city, any political subdivision, and then also state employees who are working in their official capacity. That is one question that we do tend to get a lot about state employees. So they are not considered lobbyists under either the Century Code or Ethics Commission rules. We then have individuals who are invited from a chairperson to provide information. Those individuals are also not considered lobbyists. for Ethics Commission rules or through the Century Code. And the last one is an individual who appears before a legislative committee, and they are there to present testimony, but they are introduced by a registered lobbyist. So, Courtney, I've seen you do this. Dennis, I've seen you do this. I just remember the one that you did last session. So, anyway, that is also, those individuals are not considered lobbyists. That is under both Ethics Commission rules and Century Code. Then we go and we say the next level or layer of that is, okay, do I need to register as a lobbyist? Am I a lobbyist within the definition of 5405.1, which requires me to be registered as a lobbyist? Now, if you need to register as a lobbyist, usually what we say, and this is an easy kind of mental way to break it up, is that if you are doing legislative work, if you are trying to influence the passage of a legislative bill, that is going to mean you're going to have to register under the Century Code. Okay? So the focus of the Century Code is that legislative work. The Ethics Commission's rules are broader. So usually, if you're registered, you're going to fall under the Ethics Commission's jurisdiction and be considered a lobbyist, but it also includes individuals who are trying to influence the action of boards and commissions, those administrative agencies, or other executive decisions. So it is, in fact, broader. So specifically, if we talk about under the Century Code, and that's our statutory definition, that's focused on that legislative process. So if you are attempting to secure the passage, amendment, or defeat of a legislative bill, of some sort of legislation, or you are attempting just to influence a decision of a legislative body, then you are required to register, and that statutory definition applies in that context. However, and just keep in mind that if you fail to register and you do that, it's considered a criminal infraction, but the Ethics Commission doesn't deal with crimes, just to be clear, we don't prosecute crimes. Then we look under the Ethics Commission rules. So who is subject to the Ethics Commission's rules as a lobbyist? So it's going to include anybody who falls in that statutory definition, but then it is also going to include any person who attempts to secure passage, amendment, or defeat of any administrative rule, any regulation that's coming from a department, agency, or a body of the executive branch. We also have a last catch-all phrase for the definition of lobbyist that makes you subject to Ethics Commission rules and subject to this gift prohibition, is that if there is an attempt to, quote, otherwise influence a public official action or decision, that is considered you acting as a lobbyist or lobbying. So then the gift prohibitions are going to apply. There did seem to be some confusion early on about, well, if I'm not a registered lobbyist, I can then be paying or buying things, and the gift prohibition does not apply to me. That is not the case. It is much broader than that. So defining who a lobbyist is for the purpose of Ethics Commission rules is very important, because yes, you may not have to register as a lobbyist, but you're still prohibited from that gift giving or transferring, all of the words that we use. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Logan. We're going to play some musical chairs, and he's going to talk about the other exceptions then.
Yeah, so now that we know about the baseline prohibition, you're not allowed to give a public official a gift if you meet that definition of a lobbyist. When do the exceptions apply that the Ethics Commission has created? So again, if we go back to the Constitution in Article 14, it says for private and public social and educational events, the Commission can create exceptions. So following that constitutional directive, the Commission set those exceptions to that general lobbyist gift prohibition. The exceptions mainly focus on providing food, like at the receptions, the dinners, the meetings, etc., that were occurring prior to the creation of the Ethics Commission. in 2018. So the Commission's rules recognize 3 events where an exception applies. Keep in mind, the Ethics Commission cannot make exceptions for outside the state of North Dakota, so these exceptions only apply in state. The 2 main ones are, first, a public, social, and educational event. That's any social and educational event that is held within the state and attendance is open to any state resident and others. The second one is a private social and educational event. That's any social and educational event that is held within the state and attendance is by invitation to state residents and others who are members, employees, or affiliated with a sponsoring public or private organization, entity, or association. At both types of these events, it cannot only be public officials and registered lobbyists in attendance. You need at least one non-lobbyist / non-public official to also be there as an attendee. Both types of these events must include an educational component and not be limited to a social event. So what does an educational component entail? That's not very clear just on the words educational component. So in Advisory Opinion 22-02 by the Ethics Commission, the Commission said, quote, an educational component of a private or public social and educational event should serve to inform the public officials about a topic, issue, or problem and provide helpful and thorough review of the topic, issue, or problem based upon the knowledge, skills, or research from the lobbyists. As a best practice, this language means it should include a presentation outlining the topic, issue, or problem with analysis by the lobbyist or the group the lobbyist is working on behalf of. As an extra bonus, document handouts with additional information are encouraged to ensure you meet this educational requirement. So let's say you're having the educational and social event, you met those requirements, the educational piece is there. What is allowed at a private or public social and educational event now that you've met that? The first thing is food and beverage served for immediate consumption. With that, you cannot offer bottles of wine, treats, etc. to take home after the event. It has to be consumed at the event itself. The second thing is gifts or other things of value shared as a cultural or social norm. The main example of this that the Commission uses quite often is star quilts with our tribal nations. That's a common cultural norm, so it's a very good example. Another one is gifts between dignitaries of different governments or foreign nations, those types of things when there's an event that's put on for those. The third type of thing, this one we get quite a few questions about too, is transportation, lodging costs, and meal costs for a private or public educational and social event within the state when the public official meaningfully participates in the event as a speaker or panel participant, a presenter, or a ceremonial event appropriate to the position, or if attendance is appropriate to the performance of official duties. This payment has to comply with the rates set in Office of Management and Budget Fiscal Policy number 505. So what does this payment mean more specifically? What's allowed? When's it allowed? Well, to meet the presenter, panel participant, ceremonial event participant, performance of official duties, the public official should be working at the event beyond being a participant that is there to learn and eat. They're providing some value to the event by being a hands-on component, speaker, presenter. It's a value add to the event that you are putting on. So now that you have your event set up, your educational component is there, what do you need to do to make sure you're complying with the rule completely? So the Ethics Commission's rules require event sponsors to file a notice with the Commission prior to any public or private social and educational event. This form is submitted electronically now on the Ethics Commission's website. It's under our Forms tab, and then you click Meeting Notices, and it'll take you right there to the form that you can fill out and submit online. Again, as a best practice, the Commission encourages you to submit your notice at least a week in advance of the event. If you later learn additional information that you would like to change or add to the event notice, you can go ahead and resubmit that notice and then note it's an amended version in the additional comment section that's available on that form. That's what it's there for. It's also encouraged to attach documents to the notice to provide evidence of the educational component that will be at the event. And then the commission also encourages you to not put approved by the Ethics Commission on advertising or invites for the event. The commission's rules state the commission does not approve events. That disclaimer is also on the electronic form. The form is to provide notice to the commission the event is happening and for information in the event that the commission receives questions from legislators or other public officials who are attending, that if it has been noticed with the commission and what the commission knows about the event. If you're concerned about the logistics for a specific event, go ahead, yeah. Yeah, that's an excellent question, Levi. I'm not sure if the commission's considered that specifically. The commission has directed us as staff to do a full-on review of our rules, so we're working through that. I don't know if you've seen our meetings lately or not, but the commission is currently working on revising the complaint process, working with the legislature this upcoming session. So once we do that, we really think it'll feed in and work better with our substantive rules. So we're doing a full-on review at that time, and we encourage any feedback such as that as we do that. So it's something we will take under consideration and take back to the commission. So if you are concerned about an event right now, you mentioned an advisory opinion, please request those advisory opinions. They do take some time, so you need to do it well in advance of the event that you're planning, so the commission has sufficient time to weigh in and review that and provide the written opinion to you. The commission is aware of certain instances where something has said that's been approved by the commission. The commission doesn't meet often enough to approve those events in advance, and we just don't have the resources to review them when they come in day to day, because there is quite a few of them. But if there are issues that stick out, you may hear from us as commission staff, and we'll have questions for you just to clarify the logistics, to make sure it meets the notice requirements, educational requirements. You might hear from us time to time when time allows us to review those. So now that we've talked about private and public social and educational events, there's one event we didn't talk about, and that's the informal social and educational events. The commission recognized on certain occasions lobbyists may meet with public officials on an informal basis to provide education. And that's what this is. That's recognized in the commission's rules, the informal events. That informal social and educational event is any meeting, session, or interaction occurring again within the state between a public official and a state resident, including but not limited to that registered lobbyist who is also a state resident, for the purpose of informing or educating the public official on a matter of interest or concern. So what is allowed at these informal social and educational events, which likely resemble this, sitting down for coffee with legislators on an informal basis, or other elected public officials or appointed public officials? So what's allowed at those? Food or beverage with a value of $10 or less, excluding gratuity. And it must be, again, consumed during your sit-down during the event. The lobbyist can purchase the $10 food or beverage item or items for the public official, and no prior notice with the Ethics Commission is required for that informal social and educational event.
Ready?
Hand it back over to you.
Yep.
There's some more exceptions. Yeah. Correct.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. All right. I'm going to move forward. So we covered kind of some of the big exceptions or the ones that we frequently run into. There are a few additional exceptions to that gift prohibition. So these are things that are permissible, right? It's kind of, we're always saying things in the negative, like it's an exception to a prohibition. But you guys are smart and can figure that out. So again, these are 4 other things that, and we've talked about a few of them, but just to keep them in mind, additional exceptions. One is that gift from a lobbyist to a public official in the same family, if the public official is an immediate family member. Any item given where the public official is paying fair market value, right? So if there's a fair market value, if they're paying for their own meal, et cetera. Purely informational material. This is going to be informational handouts, PowerPoints, anything that is purely informational material. And the last one is a campaign contribution. So keep in mind those campaign contributions are not considered a gift so long as they are done in accordance with campaign contribution laws, regulations, and rules. So those are an overview of the exceptions. We're going to quick touch base. Actually, we're going to recap. Sorry. We are going to go through and we're going to talk about kind of just in general what we just talked about and what we consider. Logan mentioned a few of the best practices. So under Article 14, the Commission has created these exceptions for in-state lobbyist gifting, most of them relate to that food and beverage provided for immediate consumption, whether it's at the private and public social and educational events. Those are the ones where that meeting notice is required, and there is no limitation on, we get that question a lot as well, there's no limitation on the amount you can spend for the food or beverage for those noticed events. Then you have the informal social and educational interactions, I call them, and that is where the $10 limit applies. Some of the best practices that we have really comes down to that notice form or that notice of the meeting, just to make sure that we get that. So we say as a best practice to file it at least a week in advance. 15 minutes before the event, I got to say, I do chuckle when somebody files it and it's like, oh, this is happening right now. The reason that we say get it to us ahead of time is because if there is an issue, we do try to look at those. Again, we have limited resources, but if we see an issue, we would rather talk to you about it ahead of time and prevent the issue instead of having a complaint or something later happen. So if we have a little bit of time, or if it's, something that you have a question on, reach out to us ahead of time. The rule does require that it's filed before the event. Now, let's say that you forget to file it, and you call and you say, Alicia, I forgot to file this. She's going to say, just file it as soon as possible. We make a note and we have it up there. Okay? Logan touched a little bit about providing documentation. It is helpful. It is extremely helpful when there is documentation attached to those meeting notices. And the reason that is helpful is because we will have legislators call. We will have other public officials or members of the press, members of the public call and ask us if we are aware of something, and then we can say yes, and we have their information. So it really does increase just the amount of communication that we can have and that we can ensure people that we have that information. Yes, Shane? They are, yes, that's a good point. So the attachments and the actual meeting notice forms, those are subject to open record requests. In fact, the Commission is looking at moving to where we just upload them automatically at the end of the month after events have happened, only because we get a lot of requests for them, and that way they're out there. So if you do consider if you have trade secret information, confidential information that you maybe either let us know or just don't include that particular information. But it is helpful, even if you have a speaker. Let's say that you have a speaker, so there's no PowerPoint necessarily or presentation. If you can give us a short description of what they are doing or what they're talking about, that may come up particularly in the energy industry. I can see that. That is helpful, right? But keep in mind that those are open, subject to open record requests, and we do get a lot of open record requests for those, sometimes specific or maybe just in general. The other one, Logan touched on it as well, is do not put approved by the Ethics Commission on there. On an invite, on publication materials, it does give, we think that we've heard back from legislators that they don't know what to think of that because they know that we don't approve stuff. And so when they see that, they will call us and ask questions. You can put, if you must, put something on there, put notice filed with the Ethics Commission, but also please make sure that you've actually filed your notice. Because if you put that on there, a legislator will call us and ask. Any documentation, we already talked about that, or any handouts. And we're not saying that, we're not doing that as a way to check compliance. It's more so that if we have questions, we are able to answer those questions. So those are our best practices when it comes to gifting or the gifting prohibition as we move into legislative session. As always, if you have questions, reach out. We do have an updated FAQ section on the Ethics Commission's website. If you have not looked at that already, it's been completely revamped with a lot more questions and hopefully a lot more answers than there previously were. So please refer to that. We will also be doing a Dakota Dilemma webinar on gifting in December. And that's going to be for anybody across the state. It's part of our webinar series. And so that will also be available online. Also advisory opinion, forget the number now, 22.2, right? 22-02. It talks about that educational component and how that can be met if you do have questions. So moving on, let's talk about our last two areas that do come up. They came up more last year than this year, but and I think it was maybe because it was the first cycle with them, but is the campaign contributions. So Article 14, Section 2, Subsection 3, prohibits a lobbyist from knowingly delivering a campaign contribution made by another individual. So I used to get a lot of questions on this. Can I just put it on their door and then it's not delivering because I'm not hand delivering it to them? No, you can't, because here's why. Deliver means transport, transfer, or otherwise transmit. It's pretty broad. Just have somebody else do it. That's what I say. There are other non-registered lobbyists in your entity or somebody else or in your association who can go ahead and do that. Also keep in mind that this does not prohibit from you as a lobbyist from making a personal contribution. We get that question a lot. Are you prohibiting my ability to donate to my own campaign perhaps or the campaign of somebody else? It does not do that. So for a first violation, this is a little bit of a different one, how they have this set up in the statute. So this was done in the Constitution, and then the statute in 5466 put in what the civil and criminal penalties for this is. So for the first violation of this, the Ethics Commission may assess a civil penalty of $500. But if there is an additional violation of this, the Ethics Commission is required to refer it for a criminal referral under a Class B misdemeanor, and the Secretary of State is required to revoke the lobbyist's registration. So just be aware of that one, okay? And the last one is the lobbying moratorium that is in the Constitution. So under Article 14, again, Section 2, if you really want to sit down and read the entire North Dakota Constitution, you can, but really what you need to know about the Ethics Commission for the most part is Section 2 of Article 14. It has 4 different sections and it outlines some pretty basic things. But what this tells us is that an elected public official may not be a lobbyist while he or she is an elected official, and then for 2 years after. So after their term is up as an elected official, They then have 2 years that they cannot serve as a lobbyist. And then the legislature has set the civil and criminal penalties for this one. We get a lot of questions on this, a lot. Here's why. The statute says, and we're going to actually hope to fix this one, but the statute actually says that it is a public official, not elected, but this only applies to elected officials. So if you're looking at the statute versus the Constitution, you're going, what in the world? One says all public officials and the other one says elected. So the Ethics Commission has taken the position and is introducing legislation to fix that, but it is only elected officials. Did that answer your question, Levi? Not that I'm aware of, however, I need to look at that. I also want to just add that this was put in the Constitution. So, there we go. But I actually, we did have a discussion about it at some point, and I don't remember that coming up. But I'll look, Missouri 8th Circuit. You can email it to me. Okay. Well, we'll be aware of it then if you email it. So then we'll wait for the constitutional challenge, right? That's what will happen. Anyway, that wraps up our presentation today. We will take questions. Before we take questions, I'm going to have Logan quick jump on to the Ethics Commission's website so you guys can see where to submit the meeting notices, and then also see there's been, if you haven't visited the Ethics Commission's website in this last 3-4 months, you can go ahead and do that. We have a lot more information up there. You'll find more tabs across the top as well. If you have any input, if you have an input on a safe harbor provision or something, you can go ahead and click public input and you can submit that to us that way. So we did that for our rulemaking process, but let's go down. We have our 5 boxes across the bottom underneath the, there we go. You can go here to submit this meeting notice, or you can go up on top. So if you click that, it takes you here. You can read the gift rules, or you can file your meeting notice. And this is now electronic. It used to be that you had to create a PDF of this and then email it to us. And now you just do it this way, and then Alicia gets it. So I do think, I'd actually really love to hear your feedback if this is working, if this is not working. I think generally we've heard positive things about having this. But if there's anything that we should change or update on that, let us know. Questions, comments, concerns? Mm-hmm. It probably is more than $10. No, you would not, Zach. So the reason is you have to always keep in mind that we interact with lawmakers, with public officials outside of their official duties. Are you doing that? Is it in their official capacity as a public official, or is it in their private capacity as your friend? I mean, that's the analysis that you're going to have to do. We could potentially get a complaint, right? And then I'd reach out to you and I'd say, Zach, I hear you got married. Congratulations. The meal was only $10, right? So, but you have to consider that there is that public officials, it is in their official capacity, right? Are you sitting down and are you talking with them? And are you also at that point in your wedding, are you lobbying? Right? I mean, it might depend on your wedding. My wedding, there was no lobbying happening. But, yeah. But you have to keep in mind that public officials still have a private capacity. In fact, some public officials have a private capacity that you might be doing business with them or interacting with them on a daily basis. That is not, you're not giving them something in their capacity as a public official. Yes. I don't think there is. There's not, but we'd really love an advisory opinion on that. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So are you saying in the context of a gift, meaning that it's a dollar amount or something? So I think the better question to look at, Shane, is not just whether you specifically are a lobbyist, is the organization a lobbying entity or is it not, right? Because if it's, okay, so if it's not, then it's not done in the context of lobbying. That is one thing that we talk about frequently, and I think it's so inherent, is that it has to be done in the context of lobbying, right? So if you are, for instance, if Katie and I, is it okay if I pick on you? Let's say Katie and I go out for a drink and I happen to buy her drink or vice versa, because we've known each other for years. We're not doing that if we're not talking business, we're not lobbying. That is a different context, right? So it has to be in the context of lobbying. Now keep in mind when we say lobbying, that can be broad, right? So there is probably some gray area there, but again, in that instance, if the organization itself is not lobbying, I don't see that would be a problem, correct? Am I analyzing that right? Yeah. Yep. No, you can. That's okay. Yes. Yeah. I mean, so to be honest, there's a lot of things that are in the gift rule. The gift rules were written in 2019. The gift rule, the prohibition, right? I always say when we say gift rules, it sounds like we can give gifts. So anyway, those were written in 2019. We have learned a lot about what they're missing, what we need to do better, what we need to define. And Logan has provided a lot of context for that, being able to have a general counsel in-house now. And so advisory opinions are really welcomed in that regard if you have questions. And so, but the other thing is the commission is going to look at a holistic review of these rules after session. And so I really hope that as lobbyists in our community that you guys can step forward and provide some advice in that context or some input. Yes? That's correct. Yeah. It is limited to state resident. That a state resident needs to be present. Mm-hmm. 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 We run into that in Fargo. It's great. Yep. I hope that your husband likes, glasses of wine. So, any other questions? Again, if you have questions that come up, keep in mind, legislative session is what now, 6 weeks away, right? Not quite, 6 weeks away. So we would still have time to issue advisory opinions before then. Advisory opinion timeline is usually around 90 days, but if it relates to something like the question was asked today, we can certainly expedite that. But again, our business cards are in the back if you guys have any questions, and we are here to help. Please know that we are here to help. I would much rather, and Logan and I would much rather be having these conversations than having somebody file a complaint or submit relevant information under our new process, right? In coming weeks, months, years, etc. So there you go. Thank you all.